Right, well, it looks like we're now live. Hurrah, after some technical difficulties. So my name is Vanessa. I am a long-term volunteer, and I have the pleasure of being a guest interviewer for the Donate for Refugees from the Ground interview series. And today I have the pleasure and privilege of speaking with Jacob Warren, co-founder of Action for Education, and who is coming to us live from Samos, Greece, where apparently the Wi-Fi is better than central London today. So, hi, Jacob.
Hi,
and hopefully, I can't actually see if anyone's joining us yet. Apparently, there's meant to be a box we can see some chatting, but I've not seen that. Am I missing a trick? Is it? Can you see it, Jacob?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully it will come up. So hopefully we've got people joining us that we may be just not aware of at the moment. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we kind of get started. So if anyone has any comments or questions throughout this interview, please type them in the comments section below. Hopefully we'll see them. And if not, oh, I see Amber. Sorry. I was just going to say, if not, Amber's probably going to jump back in and let us know what we've done wrong. And she's just sent me a message. So it looks like we need to go to public and then it will come up. Yeah, so any comments, questions, put them in there. Hopefully we'll have time at the end of the interview. And also, as a side note, I'm at home doing this interview with my children. So just apologies in advance if a small person appears in the background. Righto, I think, Jacob, if it's okay with you, I'd like to spend maybe the first 5 minutes or so just kind of going over a little bit of context that you and I are familiar with, but maybe not, not some of our audience would be aware of. So we're here as guests of Donate for Refugees. Maybe you could give us so people don't have to listen to me talk too much, maybe you could give us a little bit of a download of what Donate for Refugees actually does. A little bit of a pitch for our mates.
Sure, no, with pleasure. Well, I've known Amber and the rest of the Donate for Refugees team for quite a while now, quite a few years. They are an amazing group based in the UK, first and foremostly, who are always finding and looking for ways to support groups that are operating on the ground in various locations across Europe. And that support comes in, I guess, in a few different ways, a few different very meaningful ways. The first, maybe most obvious, might be funding and acting as an umbrella organization that represents the situation, but also the actors working to kind of relieve and support the situation. So that they're running events, they're running outreach across the UK to encourage public awareness and engagement and funds, which they then manage and distribute with a really nice, kind of very simple and ethical procedure to various groups operating on the ground. They get, I guess, the kind of the public pound to some of the most impactful projects across different areas of Europe. So they do this, but actually a bit more as well, because Amber's also one of the first people to always be out on the field as well, meeting the various teams, and providing along with that a lot of support and a network and a community of people kind of engaged and working towards the same goal. So I think for us and for me personally, I don't know, it's always been a bit of a delight being part of this kind of family, and that's not just it's not just a financial and funding support, but also an amazing network.
Yeah. So you made mention there of like a bit of a family. I think it's kind of a funny thing because you and I belong to the same family, and I think we've actually, by that kind of thinking, and we've actually been in the same place a number of times, but this interview is the first time we're speaking directly, right? And I think that kind of, we could segue that into what we're here to talk about, given that you're working out of the Greek islands at the moment. So we would have been on Chios at the same time, several points, and we've been in a lot of the kind of wider grassroots chats and different kind of advocacy programs, I would explain them as, I suppose. So for people who don't know about the Greek islands, I guess it's always good, given that we've been doing this for years, sometimes we can take for granted the knowledge that we have that should be, we think, common knowledge, but it's not necessarily so. So if we look at the context of the Greek islands, maybe for people who are new or just beginning to kind of get an understanding about it, how, maybe we can have a quick talk about how it's relevant, why people are coming into the Greek islands and sort of why they're not being allowed to progress further from there. I mean, we don't need a lot of political chat, but maybe we could just talk about where they're located and things like that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these Greek islands are, when people say Greek islands, you kind of imagine maybe Santorini, Corfu, Kefalonia. It seems like a kind of a holiday paradise. But I think if you work in this context, just the Greek islands, it takes on a completely different significance. These islands that we're talking about specifically are situated right next to the coast of Turkey. So you have Greece, the mainland of Greece, and then a stretch of sea, the Aegean Sea, and then hugging the coast of Turkey, there are 5 or a few more islands, but 5 main islands, from which you can see Turkey really clearly, and are just a kind of a 1-hour boat ride away. And that creates just a very, well, in this case now, problematic geopolitical situation where for refugees and migrants who are coming possibly from areas of the Middle East and northern and sub-Saharan Africa, it creates an entry point into Europe, from which point you can claim asylum. But then what's actually happened on the Greek islands? Well, I think sometimes I think there are 2 separate crises that we often make the mistake of assuming is the same crisis. Back in 2015, there was a huge number of refugees, that especially coming from Syria, that arrived from Turkey onto these Greek islands, and this really reached the news. Everyone was talking about it. It was a humanitarian catastrophe. There was a catastrophe of politics as well, but there was also a huge surge of public support, and from that, I think the grassroots kind of response to this whole situation really kind of developed, and people stepped forward to provide the very basic and most essential kind of needs for people in need. What happened since then is something a bit different, and what we've now faced is a very different crisis, and I think it's important to understand that difference, because in 2016, in order to curb the number of people coming, I mean, this is not nice language, there was an EU agreement with Turkey which said, okay, these islands will no longer be a place where you can just hop across from Turkey and then go to Europe. We will, in a sense, cut off these islands from the rest of Europe, and asylum seekers who get across this small bit of water, they won't be able to go to the mainland of Greece. They won't be able to go to Europe. And instead, we're going to keep them here for a really long time until we can really make sure and prove that they are refugees. Well, that was the idea. The reality is that the infrastructure on these islands is so ill-suited, and the resources are simply not here, that what it's created is a chronic and massively damaging and brutal and deadly situation where thousands upon thousands of people are being kept here for years and years, in a way that completely contravenes human rights and a situation that really needs to end. So that's kind of what's happening in these islands at the moment as we speak.
I feel you, and I think you've summed it up really, really well, like really succinctly. So maybe that's your experience of having to speak on this topic repeatedly and really campaigning to advocate for better, which we know is really necessary. Before we kind of go on to some more questions, we've gone deep, but maybe we could just pull back a little bit. I think I always find it fascinating. personally find it fascinating that, you know, there's just such a diverse cross-section of people in the long-term volunteering community. And for me, that kind of is a tell of how much, like, of the authenticity of the need, because it's not one cohort, like, it's just such a range of people, and they're all seeing that this needs to change. So maybe you could tell us, before we go into talking more about Action for Education and the situation in Samos, maybe you could tell us about pre-Samos, Jacob, and how you actually came to be where you are, you know, maybe in a couple of minutes, if you can if you can distill it down. I think that's really interesting for context too.
Sure, by all means.
Yeah.
And you're right. There are so many people that come from so many different walks of life, and they bring different skills. And people come with a background in humanitarian work and this kind of response, and other people don't. And I definitely came with no experience, no expectation, and no intention to stay for so long. I more or less just graduated, studied English, but I have a big background in music and teaching as well. My parents are teachers, and normally I like to think I'm just in the business of kind of creating positive spaces and engaging with people. So for me, I saw what was happening on the news and on the television, and I saw an opportunity to come to a small school on the island of Chios, to basically teach children, and to hold a space outside of the camp. So I thought, oh, well, perfect. I can come. I can teach music. I can teach English. I can bring, I guess, in a sense, the privilege of having maybe a relaxed and positive kind of mentality, to try and share that and try and bring a small moment of respite from the camp. That was basically my motivation for coming, as well as seeing firsthand what was happening here. What happened after is a different story.
Well, did any of us really predict that years on we would, you know, I know for myself when I began, and I kind of went thinking at some stage the government response would kick in, right? So we were only there as an emergency response until all the saving funds and systems and everything kicked into gear. And, you know, I'm constantly shocked and horrified at how it continues to spiral down. I know when I first went to Chios in February 2016, you know, I just thought it was end of days what they were doing to people. And then I was in Chios again when they had just made Vial the closed camp, so 9 days after the EU-Turkey deal came into effect. And to see people locked in there without access, in Vial camp without access to water, you know, children without access to milk, it's devastating. And actually, if I look at it objectively now, what's being done, I have to say, is worse, which I didn't, you know, you don't think is possible. But as you say, there was a lot of stuff in the news and the media coverage, and people came wanting to support, but it's not kind of newsworthy a lot of the time now, which is why I think interviews in the work of, you know, a lot of people who are trying to keep that awareness up are so critical, because without the support from here and other places, you can't do what you're doing, right? And having seen, like, kids getting onto the bus to come to classes at Action for Education outside Vial camp, you know, it just melts your heart. It gives them a purpose. It gives them a sense of childhood, you know, something to focus on. And it's really, you know, I'm just in awe of what you've created and the impact it has on those children and their families. So I think probably that's a good point to start talking more about Action for Education. What is your organisation about? Where are you based, and what kind of stuff do you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, Action for Education grew out of it just grew very organically out of the response that was taking place on the islands. And to be completely honest, it wasn't there wasn't a huge strategy or intention around the organization. When I first came to Chios, I was actually working with a Swiss NGO called Be Aware and Share, who remain our partners and implementing partners and funding partners on the ground in Chios as well. And I spent my first year with them in these buildings. And at the end of that year, for various reasons, they pulled out, refocused for a time in Switzerland, and we were a bit left with a kind of a logistical gap or a legal gap where we needed an organization to maintain the projects that we were running on the island. We were running at this point a primary school and a high school and a youth center. So when it started, Action for Education was very much just a way to legitimize, keep fundraising for these projects that were happening on Chios. And we had to set it up very quickly. We set it up in the UK and in Greece as well. And it started just as that. But as often happens, then as time goes on, you start really developing a bit more of a sense of what this organization is, what its mission is. And that led to a number of exciting developments since then. So well, as our name kind of suggests, we very much focus on education, and we have a focus specifically on children, but also young adults, normally up to 23 or 24. And for us, including that,
that's something I didn't know.
That's part of the legacy from before, but it's really important because when you look at the demographics on the islands, there are about 30 to 40% are children who are under 18, but another 30 or 40% are actually between the ages of 18 to 23 and 24. That is by far the biggest demographic, and for these individuals who are more often actually traveling alone, who due to their age bracket are often waiting far longer. They're not often registered as vulnerable cases, so they're living for a much longer time on the islands. They're without family, but they're often just very much just over the age of 18, young adults, and the combination of these factors means that in a sense they're one of the most vulnerable categories. They're not one of the groups that people are usually fundraising for, not one of the groups that people are usually opening centers for. The focus is usually placed perhaps on women and children for very good reasons, but it doesn't get around the fact that this is often a completely overlooked group of people. Maybe also one, when I first came to the islands, I was 23 myself, so maybe I also I kind of feel a bit connected to this, but we got to that age group. But what do we really do? Well, we always say that we have three main impacts. That's what we seek to have. The first one is that we actually are really just trying to increase the general well-being of people. We do believe education is super important, but actually we recognize that long before you get anywhere near education, people need to have access to safety. They need to have access to food, to showers, to all these other basic services that take down the barriers to education, to being able to sit in a classroom. So our model is to run centers that provide a range of services, not just English classes or not just Greek classes, and that's a really essential part of what we do. So the first thing is general well-being, and off the back of that, that's when we really do kick in with education, and we provide English, Greek classes, a lot of arts and music, all these different areas, and a lot of also kind of social work and youth work in specially designed spaces. The final impact that we do, which is a little bit different, is as much as possible it's about talking with society, about feeding back what's happening on the island, and trying to kind of increase the dialogue and increase the capacity of society to better welcome and work better with asylum seekers. Because for many people, it's people arrive with no experience, with no understanding, and one of the key impacts is having volunteers. We have hundreds of volunteers a year who come and work with us for a period of 6 weeks or 2 months or 3 months or longer. And this is an opportunity to establish and forge experiences, positive experiences, ethical experiences, people can then take back to their countries and share this message and create a more welcoming society.
Yeah, I think, wow, that's amazing. I think all the all the advocacy you've been doing has really helped you in terms of explaining, because I'm sitting here thinking, damn, it's
I kind of
really poignant, you know? Yeah.
maybe I probably should also quickly mention that just to be really clear, we've both worked on Chios before. Since then, we have run other projects in other islands, and part of this interview is to talk about Samos, which is an island which we moved to. Yes, we moved here a year and a half ago. We were running on Chios, and then back at the end of 2018. Sorry, you go, and then I'll.
I don't know if it's me who's cut out or maybe you, just for a moment there. So I was following, you've said you've moved to Samos, and I was just about to ask you, I was about to say, so I think Sandy covered the situation in Chios like pretty extensively a few weeks ago, and that would be in one of the recorded videos already. And if we were to then start beginning to talk about the actual situation in Samos itself, can you tell us a little bit about what awaits people who arrive there as refugees, the conditions of people? I think, is it Vathy Camp in Samos?
Exactly.
And maybe any observations you have about the gaps and situation there.
Yeah. So much like Chios, what you have on the island of Samos is it's a camp. Officially, it's called a reception and identification center. So everyone that arrives on this island arrives from a small rubber dinghy that comes from Turkey, from the coast here. Samos is very close to Turkey, but usually boats aren't arriving from that closest point of land, which is very close. They're coming from a much further distance across the water, and this is partly due to the geography of Turkey and where it's easier to take a boat. You arrive on Samos, and you at that point you claim asylum, and you're taken to this camp structure, which is nestled right next to the main town of Samos, the capital, if you will. This capital is very small. It's about 10,000 people. So we're talking the size of a very small town or a large village in, for example, the UK. And right next door to this village is the camp, Vathy Camp. You can see it when you arrive into the port or when you're walking in the town, and it sprawls up the mountain. And in what used to be I think it was an army base, now converted into a reception and identification center, you've got rows and rows of containers. But then surrounding that in these olive trees up the mountain, you've got hundreds and hundreds of tents. So the camp was set up quite a few years ago with a capacity for 648 people officially. It now holds over 5,700, close to 6,000 people, if you believe these statistics. They might even be higher. And because there's such a gap in what the capacity is and what the actual occupancy number is, it means that the services in the camp are under such massive strain that's what creates, in part, this humanitarian catastrophe, where there are simply not enough toilets, there aren't enough showers, there's not enough shelter, and that leads people to building informal structures in these surrounding forests, which in the center of summer, as we currently are they kind of fall foul to wildlife, wildfires, snakes, scorpions, kind of huge queues of people waiting for simple things just like a toilet or a shower, or access to water, and a whole host of other problems in winter when this kind of mountainside just becomes one huge mud bath, basically, and thousands and thousands of people are living outside of this camp, and that would be bad, but it's even worse when you simply know how long people are staying here, because people are living here for 6 months, for 1 year, for more than 1 year, and they're living every single day in a completely inadequate structure without access to electricity or anything, and what few hours kind of people might enjoy outside of this camp space is in a town which over over the last kind of years, understandably, has become extremely frustrated with the systemic issues of their government, on a local side and of the EU, for not actually creating any fix to the situation. And that creates also a culture of hostility, which further compounds the I guess the negative atmosphere or influence on asylum seekers kind of living in this context. I mean, as I say, the town is 10,000 people. Probably that's maybe an exaggerated estimation. The camp has 6,000 people. So we're talking proportionally, it's quite an even weighting. And that then further impacts lots of the local infrastructure, so specifically the hospital. And we're not even talking about how COVID-19 might have further impacted this. But even without,
I had a question about that actually. So I think it's fair to say that 2020 for most people has been particularly challenging, right? Like for all of us in the best of scenarios. But I think especially for refugees in Greece. So I think you said earlier that you'd been speaking to the media a little bit about the COVID-19 situation. Maybe we can have a short chat about that, how things have, the COVID-19 measures have impacted on refugees.
Yeah. I mean, Greece was celebrated for acting very quickly and efficiently to the COVID-19 threat back in March, and they shut down all the shops and they closed down the camps as well. And then for the following month, they didn't have a big surge in cases. There were Guardian documentaries highlighting how well the local hospitals are responding, and it seemed great. But what's happened is over the past month or two, I guess for economic reasons largely, the government has relaxed these social distancing measures and travel measures, and allowed tourists back into the country for one thing. So now, right now as we speak, we're seeing a really worrying increase in the number of cases across the country of COVID-19, and this is a big cause of concern because in these camps, which are vastly over capacity and are in isolated places where there isn't decent medical care available, is a huge threat. Now, so far up to this point, the islands have been more or less shielded from coronavirus, and throughout the entire time when many other countries were really struggling to deal with the crisis, remained unaffected. There was concern, but not a crisis, so to speak. As of yesterday, we've really started hearing of cases in Vathy itself, in this local town. So far, not yet in the camp, but these things spread so quickly that we might right now be on the verge of a really worrying outbreak. And so that's one side, and the other side is just that the response of the government to COVID-19 has been to put a lockdown on the camps, and that is well justified for medical reasons. What they say is that we want to keep residents in the camp so that the general public or the Greek public or tourists won't transmit the virus to the camp, and then the camp can remain protected, which is all very well, unless you're living in a tent in an overcrowded space for months and months and months. And I think we believe that the solution is very much not to close the camp. The solution is to decongest the camp so that an outbreak wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Sorry, just one moment. I've just got 5 more minutes. Can you take? As expected, I'm just being interrupted. I know there's nothing I can do at the moment. You just take them. Sorry about that. We'd almost had a clear run. Yeah, no, I know for myself, obviously following the COVID-19 measures very closely, I feel sick when I think about the potential consequences of a COVID-19 outbreak in the camps. And I understand the lockdown measures, as you say. However, it's a very different scenario when you're locking people in a camp where they don't have the access to basically necessities of life or means to protect themselves. Then it makes you wonder. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the value being put on those lives. If I'm.
Well, I completely agree. I actually think, I really see it as the Greek government has made a decision to allow tourists to an island like Samos. And in order to allow tourists to Samos, they have said we're gonna lock down the camp, and people are going to spend every night and many hours of the day locked in this camp. And that they have made an intentional choice to basically sacrifice the well-being of asylum seekers even more to allow for the economic input of tourists, which I do believe is important. And a country like Greece does need the revenue that comes from tourism, but it comes at this human cost. And I simply don't think that is justifiable.
No, agreed. 100% agreed. And I just hope that people listening really take on board what you've been sharing, and have a think about where they sit on issues such as this, and how comfortable they feel about our governments and representatives making decisions to allow people to be left like this. Personally, I believe that there's a lot more that European countries can and should be doing in terms of easing overcrowding situations. I realise there's a limit on how many people they can take into different countries, but I don't believe that the UK has reached that. And obviously, that's a point of contention with many. But, human rights exist to protect us all. And I think one of the things that COVID has shown is that none of us are really above the situation. A year ago, who would have thought that we would be needing to lock down in our homes, not able to travel, possibly stranded? So it really highlights this situation of human interconnection, and the fact that we would do well to do unto others as we would have it done unto ourselves, because you never actually know what's around the corner. And actually, in my experience, the asylum seekers that I've met and refugee friends who have become family are incredibly gifted, talented, hardworking people who just want a safe life, so it's a crazy time in the world, but I think we could all be doing something to make things a lot better for each other. And I'm really, really pleased to talk to you today, and have an opportunity to have a conversation that hopefully people will listen to, maybe open their hearts a little bit about. So I think I'm going to skip a question, looking at the time. But I wanted to ask, so bearing everything that you've said in mind, what does it mean to have the support of people here in the UK? What does it mean to have Donate for Refugees as one of your umbrella partners? And what can the rest of us do? What can people who are listening now or listening later on to the recording, what could each of us do to help?
Yeah, it's a good question, and an important one. Right here on the ground, everything happens because there is support from somewhere else. We exist here very much in a bit of a bubble. We're kind of responding every day. We're kind of distributing things, providing lessons. But by the time we got to that point, there's a long chain of supporters and a long chain of procedure that happens before that, and that starts in, actually mainly in places like the UK, with individuals, with people who work with different companies, different organisations, who simply make a choice, I suppose, to say, well, actually, I can set the ball rolling. That might be just through a small donation, or it might be talking to somebody, or it might be organising an event, and it's a really transparent process. And this is the wonderful thing about so many grassroots organizations, including our own and including Donate for Refugees, where you can look at the 10 euros that you donate, and you can see exactly where it goes. You can see that it's been spent on this service, or you can see that it's been spent on this item, and you can track more or less its direct impact. So we see every day, basically, the support that's financially arriving to us in Greece, and then apart from that, a kind of this wider network support that continues to kind of enthuse us and motivate us to continue, and we can transform that into something which helps kind of lives on a day-to-day basis. I think from an individual's perspective in the UK, I think actually the most important thing is to understand the situation and to follow the situation. And that might be just choosing maybe a news organization or choosing an organization that's working in the field to follow, but then to kind of commit yourself to following up on that situation. Because if you do follow one of the major news sources and news organizations, you will be given a story and you will follow it for as long as the reporters feel that they can monetize it in a sense. And then you'll probably forget about it. And another kind of red news story will come up and you'll follow that for a while. But I think with this situation here, what it requires is for people to say, okay, this situation in the Greek islands has been going on for 3 years. I'm personally invested in understanding it and following it. And I will, put a reminder in my diary once every month or once every quarter to say, oh, what is actually happening here? Like, is it still the same or has it got better? Because the news can trick us into thinking that a situation's been solved or has gone away, but it hasn't. So I would encourage people to find a way to follow and then to almost challenge themselves to take that story and to return to it, even if The Guardian or even if BBC isn't telling you it's still a problem, because that's really the only way to kind of actually find solutions and hold governments and other agencies accountable to actually having change.
In a more, more maybe immediate kind of context, have you got a fundraiser, or is there something that we could share, perhaps put in the chat or link when the video is posted, that would be directly useful to Action for Education in Samos at the moment?
At the moment, we're actually not running any specific fundraisers. So I would probably encourage, if people want to take direct action, to do one of two things. Either to, if people do want to make a donation to something very specific that they see that we're doing, I would encourage anyone to feel very free to reach out via email and say, hey, I'd like to just donate even a very small amount, and say, I'd love it to be spent on this, and we can make that happen. Or I would actually point people towards donating to Donate for Refugees, because Donate for Refugees are fantastic, because when we have a need for something specific, when we have an unexpected legal cost or a need to cover the food ingredients that we use to cook in our centres, we can come to Donate for Refugees. So I think there's two ways to do it. And apart from that, I just recommend kind of watching this space. We have some new projects opening actually in the coming weeks and months. And for those, we will be doing some very specific crowdfunding. So I would suggest you follow what we're doing and check back in.
Okay. I think maybe last couple of minutes, probably get told off for talking a little bit long, but we don't seem to have too many questions. Just one from Najibullah. Sorry about your name if I've made a hash of it. So I'm coming live from London and Jacob is coming live from Samos. If you are needing help in a camp in Athens, I will private message you. There is a support group for people in Athens, a Facebook page. You can get information. So I can drop you a private message after this. And I think
I'm just going to join you quickly.
Sure.
If you have a look in the host chat, like all good live things, I'm just going to pop in. If you look in the host chat, there are some questions and I've copied them in there for you because for some reason they haven't come through on our tech. So have a quick look. I'm going away again. Bye.
Great. Thanks for monitoring us, Amber. Right, let's have a look then. If we scroll down. So Laura, how do you keep your spirits up in the face of such a prolonged situation which seemingly has no end?
It's a great question, Laura. I'm laughing almost, maybe slightly manically. It's not easy to, and I don't think it's maybe that assumes that maybe hopes for a positive answer. It's often not. It's often simply super hard to do that. And I think it really increasingly hard because basically all of what's happened over the past 6 months with coronavirus, with a lot more violence occurring on the islands, and a big increase in the numbers living in the camps, has come on the back of 3 years of already this really protracted situation. And that's really kind of a blow to the chest, that you work for ages and you hope to see an improvement, but actually it just ends in an even harder situation to deal with. So for me, that I don't know how I do it. Socializing when possible, in summer, maybe getting out to a beach, but then also just trying to, I guess, put into perspective and understand what impact you can have, and not beat yourself up for not bringing about system-wide change, which will only happen slowly and with coordinated and a lot of support from a lot of people.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. That's a huge lesson. Yeah, I think most long-term volunteers I know have been on the receiving end before they've figured that one out, and it's not pretty. To understand that you can't be responsible for like a systemic problem, but you can do what you can in the ways that you can, when you can, and know that the people you're helping, really appreciate it. So we've got some more. Well, that's good. I'm starting to be a bit worried that we're just talking to ourselves, but I was remaining optimistic that maybe people will watch your recording. So Anissa says, awesome, great work. Vanessa says, it's really good, even though awful, to hear such a graphic explanation of the current conditions in Vathy. And can people leave the camp at all yet? I think you've said no, it's back on lockdown because they've opened the island for tourists. Is that right?
Well, so the measures are changing quite quickly, but actually, what's happening, officially, is that camp residents cannot leave during the night. So when it gets to now, it's 9 p.m. People can't come in and out of the camp until the following morning. And then during the day, only a restricted number of people can leave per hour. So that's meant to be around 100 people, 150 people per hour. You have to get a permission slip. And if you don't have that permission slip, then you face the risk of receiving a fine or something else. So there is some movement inside and out of the camp, but it's a lot more restricted than it was before, when you could come and go as you pleased.
Is it compulsory mask wearing out in public as well? So everyone would need a mask if they're going into town, or is
not in open spaces, but in supermarkets. And there are some great distributions happening from different organisations here that are covering the needs of the camp when it comes to having access to masks. And for example, in our centre, we provide kind of masks every day to the students when they arrive to come into our classes. And then we take those masks back and we wash them, disinfect them, and then can reuse them the following day.
No, some friends who are interested in sustainability will be loving that. And Vanessa's got another question. How does Action for Education work with other NGOs on Samos, like Still I Rise and Samos volunteers?
I'd like to say very well, actually. But what I mean by that specifically is, on Samos as an island, there is a really, really great spirit of collaboration between the NGOs, and the sector can sometimes be criticised for being a bit, for there being a bit of infighting or competition or not great collaboration. That, as I see it, is not the case on Samos at all, and it's so uplifting. And when I first came to Samos kind of a year and a half ago, there were a lot of new organisations that arrived. Still I Rise and Samos Volunteers were two organisations that were here before. Firstly, they really welcomed all the new organisations, and secondly, that set a precedent for continuing collaboration that takes form in fortnightly coordination meetings, different working groups, socialising between members of the team, that really builds a strong and interpersonal set of relations, which then kind of translates into much better operating, because you share resources, you share support, and that's kind of multiplying the impact. So we work together in coordination, we work together in referrals, and sharing kind of expertise, information, knowledge, and all these areas.
That sounds ideal when we know it's not always common. So that's really wonderful.
It's really nice.
So unless unless Amber from Beyond is going to pop back in with more questions, I might just start winding up and say thank you to everyone who's taken the time. Here we go. Confirm no other questions. Thank you very much, boss. And just to put a shout out that the next Facebook Live from the ground interview for Donate for Refugees in the series, at least, will be on Sunday the 9th of August from 2 p.m. UK time. And that is with Trish Clowes. Apologies if I'm saying surnames wrong. We'll be speaking to Caroline Clothett. I'm looking at my own scribbled writing. Of the Refugee Women's Centre and Maison Sesame in northern France. So it would be good to get the perspective on what's happening in France as well. But I just want to say thank you very much, Jacob, on a personal note, for your time and all your efforts. You know, I'm so grateful for people like you who were out, as you say, you know, grafting, grinding, day in and day out, reacting, responding, and showing up with a smile, you know, for a group of people who have been terribly dehumanized and desperately need to have allies alongside them recognizing their worth, you know, and just from myself and everyone I know here in the sort of wider family, shall we call ourselves, you know, thanks. I'm sure you didn't intend to go and change your life, as we started talking about at the beginning. You know, no one really intends to do what you've done, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who are really grateful for everything, and to the team as well. And I know, actually, we should say maybe one more thing before we sign off, that not all of your team are sort of international volunteers, right? You're working alongside refugee volunteers who work to sort of help liaise with the community and that. And I understand recently you had a bit of a push for trying to give a stipend or help them with living costs, which I think got good support. Is that right? Yeah, so I think it's really important. So, you know, it's not, we're not going into save, it's like working with locals and refugees, and it's really like collaborative. It's a really wonderful example. Yeah.
No, completely. It's really it's trying to build solidarity and make connections. And in the age of COVID-19, when actually travel is even harder, working with the communities that you have around you is anyway the best thing to do.
Yeah.
All the more necessary.
Well, I mean, they know that they know themselves and their community. So tick just failed, so maybe that's our cue to wave and say thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thanks everyone at Donate Refugees again.
Yeah, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
So is Amber going